Today we're going to take a look at the homeless. Not necessarily the problem of homelessness, because that's a major problem here in America. In fact, there are 610,000 people that right now are homeless, according to statistics. And the number's growing. But one of the things to realize is that a lot of these people don't necessarily suffer from mental illness or drug and alcohol abuse. Many of them were just a paycheck away from losing everything and they lost their job. 11% of those that are homeless are victims of domestic violence. One of the big things, though, that I want to address first and foremost, because an SHTF situation doesn't mean that it's nationwide. It could be a personal SHTF. It could be something that you have to deal with that really no one else around you does. But I think the first thing to consider is your friends and family and your community. Have you built relationships that if you ever get in a really bad situation that you're going to have somewhere to go? You know, a lot of times we look at the bug out. You're out in the woods and you're surviving, but really that's just a glorified refugee. And I've said that in one of the earlier videos. You know, bugging out is not something that you want to find yourself doing, even if you are well prepared. You're out in the elements, you're vulnerable, and that's the same thing with the homeless population here in America and around the world. So what we're going to do, though, is take tips in case there's ever a massive civil unrest, in case there is a natural disaster that comes through, or things that as normal, middle-class, everyday people, we could face those situations and it not be any fault of our own. So, of course, first thing is to have the support group behind you. If you ever get in trouble, you have a place to go. If you're bugging out, you need a destination, not just to be out wandering around in the woods. Second thing is, if you find yourself homeless, it doesn't mean that you need to live just under a bridge. You could have a motorhome. A lot of people just choose to live in motorhomes, but a lot of the homeless do as well. Living in vehicles, that is a major thing that people do all across the country. And in fact, that's going to be a subject coming up of things that we want to talk about is living in your vehicle. And then, of course, having a good tent or a good shelter. Now, the first thing I would consider as far as low budget is having a good tarp. These are light, they're handy, they're easy to kind of stow away in a pack, and this will keep you from the elements. It'll keep you safe from rain and snow and everything else, and maybe having some cordage to go along with it to go into those islands. Of course, then we get into homeless shelters. There are shelters, refugee shelters that pop up, especially in a survival type situation with environmental disaster. And so a lot of places will open up, they pull out cots, they have food that they serve. And we have homeless shelters all across our city, and they're all across America. These places can be a safe haven for a certain time, to kind of go in and get your thoughts together, take a good hot shower, and take care of your personal hygiene. Now, one problem that happens a lot in shelters is that sometimes there are people there that can be very aggressive, combatant, and that is one problem that a lot of shelters face. I know that we've tried to help a number of people, and we would mention taking them to the shelter, and they said, well, I got kicked out of that shelter for fighting. And that is really something that goes on a lot. So shelters, especially with large groups, may not be the best option, but it's definitely something to check into. And if that's not an option, you may find yourself being out with others that are homeless. One big thing is to really kind of make sure that you attach to some kind of group. Now, you may have your family, but wherever there are other homeless people, they're going to know the best places to camp, the best places to kind of avoid any kind of problem with law enforcement or city officials. And so that might be a good option. One thing I would say, and this is something that the homeless have recommended, is to go into the camp during the day, get to know a few people, kind of build up some trust, and then that way, you'll be welcome. To show up at night, a lot of times there's a lot of distrust. And so going ahead and trying to befriend some of them, might be a good option. And whether this is the homeless or just other people like yourself, definitely it's going to be high attention, high stress. And so it's important to be able to kind of, find your place. And of course, being in a large group also keeps you from other people coming in and attacking or stealing your stuff. Now, one thing about attacks is to avoid confrontation. I mean, that's very important to kind of keep a low profile and, not let tempers flare and kind of just avoid situations. The big thing is if you get injured, you could really need medical help and not be able to receive it. And a small cut can turn into infection and a lot of problems later on down the road. So it's one of the things about just keeping an even temper and just, again, avoiding confrontation. Now, one thing, of course, if you have a tent, that is one of the best ways if you're just camping out. But a lot of times, a lot of the homeless will build their own, sometimes very elaborate type shelters. But cardboard is a big thing that a lot of homeless use. It is a natural insulator, and you can even use it to put up under your clothes to keep you insulated. There have been a lot of abandoned houses that have been found where homeless were living there, and they would staple or put cardboard all over the walls to insulate the room during the wintertime. And so cardboard is a big friend for people that are homeless. Of course, it's not suitable for the elements, so you'll need to have something over it. And that's where the tarp can really come in to play. And the priority is shelter. That is number one. You have 3 hours in extreme conditions that you can live, and so definitely make sure that you have that covered. Secondly is clothing, and wearing 3 layers of clothes, whether it's your next to your body, you want to wear something soft, something that you can just very comfortable every day, and then you need something to insulate. And then at the end, you need a shell. And this keeps you from rain, weather, cold, wind, things like that. Those are the 3 basics for clothing. Now, during the summer and spring, of course, obviously you don't need as much, but you don't know how long you may be homeless, and it's good to have those things available. One thing great is there's a lot of places like Goodwill, Salvation Army, and different places that you can go and buy clothes really inexpensively, and a lot of times they will give those clothes out. And so having a good pair of clothes is important. If you get soaking wet, you need to be able to have something to dry off. Now, one of the most important parts, and this comes from the homeless as far as, people asking, what is it that you would really want to have, is socks. Socks are not necessarily donated as often as other articles of clothes. And so one thing I would recommend right now is that if you like to give to shelters or the Goodwill or whatever, giving socks would be a great way to kind of help those that are really in need. But for you, definitely have extra socks, good solid socks, and your shoes, your boots, whatever you're going to wear, your footwear is important. Now, one thing about keeping warm is you may not have those layers, and you can supplement with plastic bags, with cardboard and other things to be able to insulate your body. So that's just a tip, and that comes from a lot of the homeless. Now, if you've been in fast food restaurants or you've been in gas stations that serve food, there's usually extra napkins. If you're going to purchase something, whether it's a drink or whatever, you can pick up a few extra napkins, maybe a little salt, and those kind of things that are just free. But here's the thing, guys, don't abuse it, because we don't want to be stealing things. That's one thing about being prepared. The more you're prepared, the more that you can stay in line with who you really are. And that's really important. You don't want to be stealing someone else's pack because you don't have the supplies you need. We used to serve in a food pantry, and while we weren't necessarily serving homeless, which they did come in, it was mainly people with just really low income that needed a boost. And we dealt with a lot of people during that time. And I'll tell you guys, they come from every walk of life. Now, as far as sleeping in the outdoors, a couple of tips that were brought up by the homeless is to take a water bottle, put hot water in it, and put it next to your body while you're sleeping. And this will give you some extra warmth. Even people have used urine in bottles, and they could use that for a little while to keep them warm. So, you really have to improvise to survive when it comes down to these things. And of course, water is a very important part of survival. And, being able to get water. Now, in an urban situation, typically there's fresh water around. And so you'll be able to get some kind of water. But having a good water filter could really be key. And the further out you get from the city, the more that's going to be important. So having a water source, but yet having good clean water, because if you get sick, it's going to really limit you in what you can do. And in a stressful situation, that's one thing you want to try to avoid. But now, having a dog is also a good option for homeless. There are many homeless that do have dogs as pets and companions. These dogs are great because they keep you warm at night, and they are a companionship, and plus they are somewhat of a protection and keeps people from sneaking up on you because you have your dog to warn you. Of course, you got to feed that dog, but sometimes you get more compassion because of the dog. Having the right gear in your pack is essential to survival. but not having it overloaded. One thing that you could do is to take the essential things that you need. And really, we've talked about this a number of times, where items that have multiple uses, such as bandanas, plastic bags, paper clips, safety pins, things like that, which you can do to improvise to stay alive. And so that's one thing. It doesn't take up as much room either if there are things that you can do for multiple uses. Also, when you're starting to pull items out of your pack, make sure that you put them back once you finish using them, and keep your gear in one place. One thing about the homeless is they always have to be ready to move at a moment's notice. And so you have all your gear in one place. If you have it strung out everywhere, you could lose it. Now, speaking of losing your pack, a lot of people will use their backpack to, as a pillow, or to wrap it up, inside their arms, in case while they're asleep, the pack gets stolen. And typically that's everything you own in that pack. But also having a really good solid pack is important. Go ahead and get your pack, make sure it's something that is gonna last. It's worth spending a little extra money for that pack. Another thing that's important to have in your pack are first aid items. Now, really just your basic Band-Aids, antibiotic ointment, gauze, things like that can just get you through, because again, a small infection can turn into a lot of problems later. And so having good first aid kit is important. If you can have a trauma kit, that's even better. But again, you've got to stay lean and trim to be able to move quickly. Okay, now when it comes to food, of course, in an urban environment, especially with restaurants around, there's a lot of people that go through the trash cans, go through dumpsters and find food. It's according to the situation. If it is a serious SHTF with riots and everything else, restaurants may not be open. But if restaurants are open and if there's food, be careful what you eat. Especially stay away from things that are made with dairy or meat, because it can spoil and it can make you sick. Especially vegetables, things like that are usually safe to eat, and try to keep them clean if you can. But that's one thing that's important if you're looking for food that's been thrown out. Now, one thing is you can make friends with the manager of a restaurant, and at the end of the night when they get ready to throw food out, that might be an option. But again, that has everything to do with the situation. And guys, one thing about, SHTF is a lot of times, we look at it as, going back to the Stone Age, and that may well be. But anything short of that, a lot of times normal life can continue on, and you need to be ready to capitalize on it. Now, of course, soup kitchens and, shelters that serve food, there's a lot of places that do that on a regular basis, and getting to know people that are also homeless or maybe out and about can help lead you to those places. Now, personal hygiene is important not only for your health, but also just for your appearance. The cleaner, the more presentable you are, the better it will go for you, whether you're dealing with law enforcement or with other people. And if people see you as more of a normal person, they're going to be more out and have more compassion for you. It's amazing, doing a lot of studying for this, how many people are homeless and yet work normal jobs. There are people that you'll run into on an everyday basis that you think is just a normal person going home every night. They may be living in their car, they may be living in a tent. That's just their job while they're getting back on their feet. And so, the more presentable you look, the more you're able maybe to get some work and to do odd jobs and things like that. And so that is really key to surviving. Keeping your teeth brushed, soap clean, staying clean, keeping your clothes clean. If you need to go to a laundromat and be able to, to use that to keep your clothes looking good, that is an important thing if at all possible. Now, money may be tight, and so maybe picking up some baking soda to kind of keep your teeth clean, and for deodorant, and just, kind of washing off, adding some water to it. Baking soda can be a little bit abrasive, so you need to be careful with it. But if that's your only way to keep clean, it's definitely something that you can utilize. Now, having the ability to make fire and having the tools you need. You need to be able to cook, to boil your water. You may need it just for warmth. And having a small can, you can make a little rocket stove. There's a ton of different rocket stove ideas out there, whether you're using cans or even bricks. That's a great way to do it, using small sticks if you're near a park, and you can keep that heat, keep yourself warm, give you some morale, and also some light at night. But being able to cook that food is very important. So having those, items available. Maybe even having some kind of spoon to be able to stir and to eat. Again, we don't really know what kind of situation can happen. You may be able to join a health club and be able to take a shower, keep yourself clean that way, plus have some exercise, maybe that you're going to fast food restaurants or gas stations that stay open 24 hours and you can use the bathroom, you can get into a stall, maybe clean up some, having these places available. But if it's total SHTF, if there's civil unrest, if it's an economic or a natural disaster, those may not be in the cards, but it's something definitely to have in your playbook. Now guys, I know this is a little different way to view things, but after I did the video on using survival tips from the Great Depression, it really made me think about real world scenarios. A lot of times we live in kind of a sheltered, run to the store, we have our stuff, and we can just survive. But when it really comes down to it, guys, we may not have supplies that we can refill. We may find ourselves in situations, and there are so many different ones. And so, again, 610,000 people in the U.S. are homeless. And those numbers are growing every day. And guys, we need to be ready and prepared now that while we have the means to be prepared, and make sure that if we find ourselves in that situation, that we can take care of ourselves and our families. But number one, guys, make sure you secure those relationships with your family, with your friends, and with your social and civil groups that are out there. Guys, that will go a long way into keeping you, from being without a home, without shelter, until you can get back on your feet. In a massive survival situation, the gloves are off there. But at least you'll be more prepared, not only physically, but mentally. And guys, that's really what this video is all about. Guys, if you're serious about prepping and survival, check out Survival Dispatch Insider. It is the best resource for survival and prepping on the web. There's many nationwide recognized contributors that are there. We upload one video a week exclusive to the Insider. I'll have a link down below in the description. Check it out. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. Whether it's fleece or something like that to be able to keep you warm. And then you need to have, okay, the cat's trying to get out. Come on. Next comes clothing. And, now next comes clothing. You may need to get